let's jump to the first story. I tweeted this. Steven Crowder has been suspended from Twitter after saying he can confirm that people voted at addresses that do not exist. He stated the same in a video. So you may have seen the video. It came up earlier this morning. He did this on his morning show. He literally sent people to addresses. Let me see if I can pull up like a screenshot. I'm trying to find it. There we go. Wait, we just lost it. So there we go. Is that? Let me see. I'll just play a little clip from his bit. So you can see they're holding up the newspaper. They go and they find these this is just like looks like a house. Here we go. Empty parking lots. Wow. One of them that was really interesting was that they're holding up a newspaper and they show an empty parking lot. And apparently there was supposed to be an apartment number 409. Now, I'll put it very, very simply. Crowder claimed all of this on YouTube. He straight up said that he can prove it and he will testify under penalty of perjury that this is true. These addresses do not exist. I'm simply saying, he's saying it. I'm showing you what I saw. It looks compelling. I would need to actually check the addresses because I got to be honest, I'm just seeing Crowder's video, but I don't think he'd go and he'd make this up. The crazy thing is, Crowder did not say, he actually clarified this very, very clearly, that he's not saying this is evidence of any, bigger scheme or anything like that, just that they found evidence of addresses that don't exist. That's all it is. It doesn't mean the entire election is bunk or anything like that, but they should certainly be looked into, right? That's as far as any reasonable person would go until you get to like courts or adjudication. Twitter locked his account because he tweeted this. That to me is absolutely insane because he actually has video showing this. So he did put up an article on his website and he says, proof we went to fake voter addresses. He talks quite a bit about it, but that's the gist of the story. You should check out his bit too, because it was pretty funny where he kind of talks about Mike Lindell having this bad information, believing this Dominion stuff, and he's getting sued over it. But he also mentions that, Mike Lindell has this documentary called Absolute Proof, and Crowder did the segment called like Absolute Proof, 100% fair trade, definitive, and all that stuff. So I think, considering Mike, you're a lawyer, I'm curious what your thoughts are, because we should definitely talk about the Supreme Court as well and Pennsylvania.
Yeah, so that was another reason that I clash so much with the first-time Trump voters, is they were saying all this Dominion stuff, and I'm like, no, that's not how it works. There was no shootout. Like, I'm like, why am I the debunker? My job is...
You mean that in Germany they claimed that like servers were being airlifted in the sea? It's crazy.
Satellites in Italy. Someone was telling me that. I'm like, huh? Are you kidding me?
And I hate doing that because Trump supporters are so attacked on every side. The last thing I want to do is shoot inside the bunker. But I don't want people to believe things that are wrong. And the problem here, to tie into that point with Crowder, there was a guy, you guys would know his name, I forget it right now, but he went through and did an analysis like this of nursing homes, halfway houses, other areas. And by the way, I'm not making any claims. But it showed like, oh, wow, so there's 100 votes came out of here. Some of them were supposedly mail drops. And there were a lot of things that you could look at, like Crowder looked at. But instead, everybody now thinks the narrative is that a few goofballs on the internet, or in the case of Mike Lindell, a successful entrepreneur who believes what he said, which as a lawyer makes that a really interesting case because usually, as you know, to sue someone for defamation, you have to show actual malice. Malice doesn't mean that you didn't like the person. Malice means that you didn't actually believe what you were saying, or you entertained doubts about what you were saying.
Like that Mike Lindell knew what he was saying was false.
Yeah, or
the dude believes it all.
Yeah, he believes, and he's like, hell yeah, you're suing me. This is amazing. I can't wait to see you guys in court. So as a lawyer, I'm thinking this is actually a newer area of law, like how do you actually get him for defamation? But the problem is that became the whole narrative of it, where now Mark Elias and other people say, oh, the Trump people filed 100 lawsuits, none of them went anywhere. This is proof there was nothing there. And it's like, no, they filed like a couple. One of them was the Pennsylvania one that didn't get heard. And when you look at the issues that they tried to resolve, they were quite interesting. Or if you look at the evidence that was presented that Crowder is presenting, it's quite interesting. It's the kind of thing that makes you go, maybe you should think about, but that's been completely hidden in the squid ink of this Dominion stuff and all the weird conspiracy. I'm rarely call someone a conspiracy theory, but there's no other word for that kind of stuff. If
I had to have a conspiracy, it would be that the conspiracies are the conspiracy to derail the actual conspiracy. You see what I did there?
Mm-hmm. No, I believe that. No,
I'm not saying it's true. I'm joking.
No, but I actually vacillate between, because there's some people that are they lead people down such a bad path that you think in life you get lucky, you're going to have some wins, and you're just a loss after loss after loss. So I'm a little COINTELPRO conspiracy oriented, where I do think a lot of people do set you up.
Well, you don't need to have a conspiracy here. We have Cass Sunstein, Obama's information czar, that literally wrote the playbook on disinformation, and he talked about creating fake conspiracies to make anyone questioning government look insane. And he did this specifically with a lot of family members and rescue workers in New York City after the 2001 events. So he wrote it in his own bylines, in his own published paper. I asked him about it. He denied even writing it, even though it's still up there on the internet.
Where was it published?
It was published in one of scientific journals that he wrote about how to combat and fight disinformation, and one of his ways was infiltrating groups in real life and online and making them look crazy.
And that's what I kept complaining about when these people come out with these really absurd conspiracies about like CIA agents storming German servers and then like Italy and whatever. I'm like, who cares? Who cares? We've got a constitutional legal battle happening in Pennsylvania that's more important and could have a bigger result.
Well, you had credible testimony under oath in the Michigan hearings. I actually watched the hearings, and my jaws were dropping. You had credible, normal, decent people providing eyewitness testimony of what they saw, but nobody watched the hearings. The Pennsylvania hearing, that didn't really get covered. The Michigan one, which I found quite persuasive, wasn't really covered. So now when people think of, I don't want FRAUD of the election, then that's what they think is all this really kooky stuff, when actually there were issues. There were issues with people changing the rules midstream, which is what happened in Pennsylvania.
Right.
Whereas you aptly tweeted, if they change the rules and you sue, they go, well, you don't have standing, nothing bad has happened. And then the rules are applied, and then you sue, and they go, well, it's too late now, it's moot. Right? It's like catch-22, yeah.
That's a horrifying precedent. And that's basically what we got with Clarence Thomas in his dissent. He said, we failed to, rule on this before, and now we're not going to do it after. What are the rules? Like, no one's going to know. No one's going to have any confidence in the system.
Right, and that was a legitimate legal issue. That was a legitimate case that should have been heard. But the Supreme Court justices, I think Kavanaugh and Barrett, I think they would have heard it had January 6th not happened. And moreover, had there not been all of these the Linwood stuff and all of this other things that people brought up, is you don't want to be caught up in that net of here's all the kooks and the kooks are in the net, and now you're a Supreme Court justice and you're in the net with them.
I hear you, but man, talk about cowards. I wouldn't care. I don't care.
Okay, well, I'll make the case for them then. I'll make the case for John Roberts as an institutionalist. The way that John Roberts would say it, if he were being candid, is that this is how you learn it in federal courts and law school, and is the Supreme Court is a co-equal branch of government, just like the Congress and just like the executive branch. They had to fight and scrape for all their legitimacy and all their power. The Supreme Court was not powerful at all, actually, before the Warren Court in the 1950s. So what do they have? They don't have guns. They don't have a budget. They don't have any real power. All of their power is soft power.
Right.
So if you're going to enter an area where there's such a narrative that's already set so strongly as there is now with this election stuff, then you're attacking, or you're going to make the institution weaker by doing it. Now, you would come back and say why you don't agree with that, and I would agree with you. But that would be what John Roberts would argue. So when people talk about John Roberts, a lot of conservatives, people especially, he's an institutionalist. So fundamentally, even Comey was the same way. Comey was crooked, so it's maybe not the right example, but the idea is you protect the institution of the Supreme Court. That means you have to pick your battles, and if you're going through the calculus, you're thinking, do we really want to get involved in all this stuff when there's talk of insurrection? And
it could be that it's a fight they knew they weren't going to win anyway, so they said it was moot.
Yeah, exactly. And some people call it a cop-out, which is a fair point. Other people will say that you have to protect the soft power of the Supreme Court. And there's a fair point to that, because a lot of our institutions have lost soft power.
When you say that he would fear that it's going to weaken the institution, is that it will weaken the perception of the institution through the media?
Well, through the collective hive mind. So the idea is that the Supreme Court can't cut anyone's budget, but Congress, if they wanted to, could cut the law clerk budget. There's all these different ways that they can mess with them. The Supreme Court, if they want to have an order enforced, they can't have the FBI kick down the door and take power. Their rule is by reason. Their rule is by soft power. Their rule is by people saying, that's the Supreme Court opinion. That really means something. After Bush versus Gore, you got to remember, if we hadn't had 9/11, Bush versus Gore would have been 4 years of Bush being the orange man. The institution of the court, the soft power of the court had declined significantly because it was a close opinion on partisan lines, and it was a little dodgy even by my assessment of it. So you had a loss of institutional power, a loss of soft power, the idea that this is the Supreme Court, this is an edict, you should follow it, because ultimately if the Supreme Court issues a ruling that an executive officer doesn't like, the president could just say, well, who cares, right? There was I believe it was Andrew Jackson who said the Supreme Court has issued their ruling, now let them enforce it. All that historical background is swirling around, and it is fundamentally true. If the Supreme Court issued a ruling and Trump didn't want to follow it, he could just say, we're just not going to abide by this rule. What are you going to do? I have my Praetorian Guard. So there's a lot of conflict there, and soft power is kind of an amorphous term too, which is how do people rule? Well, the Supreme Court, they don't have any hard power. Congress has hard power, right? They can...
Like what, subpoena power?
Well, by hard power, I mean they can actually do things to you, like you don't have a budget. The lights aren't going to work. They can pass laws making something a crime.
Right.
They have an enforcement mechanism. Whereas like even the media, to put a different example, is the media has no hard power, soft power. As more people just say, we don't really care, or as Elon Musk tells the Washington Post, I don't care, I'm not going to answer your articles. And as more people say, we like Elon, we don't like the media, who cares? The media doesn't have any power anymore, right? The power is only in that ability to shape public opinion, the ability that, oh, this is in the New York Times, this must be matter, this must be true, this is how we're going to live our lives. So that's the Supreme Court, even though it's a branch of government.
Elon's response was pretty telling today because the Washington Post quoted him as saying, quote, give my regards to your puppet masters when they asked him for an interview. So he didn't just like shun them away. He made sure to send them a message, especially to the Washington Post, which is being seen more of an institutional establishment kind of paper of record for the intelligence agencies.
I won't do interviews with any of these people. I ignore them. And honestly, even in like smaller independent and, whatever, channels, I won't do that for the most part either. There's very few anything I'll do with anyone else. The whole system is just, man, is a clown show, to put it mildly.
Right, and their soft power has declined. So here's what I mean by that is it used to be that a hit piece would actually kind of damage you, right? You got written about, it said bad things. People say, ooh, I don't know if I want to talk to that person, to be around that person. And then it changed to the point where I don't even respond. Only kind of boomers like Jordan Peterson respond to hit pieces. Oh, read this mean thing they said about me. Everybody else knows your people aren't even going to read it. 99 of them aren't even going to read it, first of all. The ones who do read it aren't even going to believe it. So even if the media writes something about you critical that's true, your own followers are going to say, oh, they probably just made the whole thing up. The whole thing's fake. That's a change, though, and that's what I mean by the soft power, the ability to shape narrative, the ability to shape public perception.
I got to be honest, if that's, I hear what you're saying, and I understand it. And that sounds to me like the Supreme Court is a bunch of cowards. They're weak, they're pathetic, they have no real power anyway. And it sounds like you've got these three branches of government where they pretend the Supreme Court is co-equal, when in reality they're like the loser kids in the corner of the playground. And their only claim to power is they're like that little kid in recess who would suck up to the teacher, is just crossing their fingers and hoping you listen to them. If they're not actually going to stand up for anything, then what's the point of having it in the first place?
Well, they would say that they're just a check on government, and that check should be used in exceptional circumstances and under limited circumstances. That was the idea. That's why when people talk about judicial activism, they're talking about the court taking a very active role, as the Warren Court did. Oh, there's a right to this, there's a right to this, there's a right to that, there's a right to that. These rights are protected. The other rule, or rather the other view of the court, is a more conservative one, jurisprudentially, not necessarily politically, which is that the Supreme Court shouldn't get involved in this kind of stuff. So I'll give you a great example. Is if the Senate had convicted Trump, and Trump had tried to sue in the Supreme Court, there's something called the political question doctrine, which holds that they would just say, oh, this isn't for us to decide. This is a political question. So there's things called abstention doctrines, and one of which is a little bit different from standing. But the idea is abstention is, even when the Supreme Court has jurisdiction, they won't hear the case under these various doctrines. So you're right in the sense that they're not the most powerful, but somebody like John Roberts would maybe cheekily respond, I agree with you. That's the point, where we are the little kids. We're not the one who's supposed to exercise this power.
If that were the case, and it sounds like it is, then that means serious trouble for this country.
Well,
it means there's no resolution to serious disputes.
Yeah.
It means that the conflict that has been escalating over the past several years will have no resolution. Your hope is that this council of legal experts and elders can step in and say, we've heard the arguments and we will now be the tiebreaker or the referee in this one. Instead, they said, you've complained. You've actually brought up some interesting arguments. Shove it.
Yeah, I mean, look at the way Andrew Cuomo treated the Supreme Court. They ruled his lockdown orders were unconstitutional. He said, I don't care. I'm just going to do new ones that don't apply to this specific one. So, seeing Andrew Cuomo do this really kind of signals that the Supreme Court is not going to be your savior, like many people expect.
I see like the Supreme Court as like a lens that's focusing the law for the American people to see clearly. And it's up to us as the people to enforce what they can kind of show us. But that's all they really do is pass through ideas.
It's meaningless.
Well, I would say this, though, is as critical as I might be the Supreme Court or federal judges, especially in federal courts, I would trust a federal judge. If I had to choose some kind of like gambit, do you trust this random member of Congress with your rights? You trust the president with your rights, Trump or Biden? Or do you trust a federal judge with your rights? I would trust the federal judge the most.
I think you'd be better off choosing a partisan member of your tribe in a political party.
Yeah, but we're doing a Rawlsian veil of ignorance thing, though. We're saying that you can't get to pick. Like, I would obviously, choose. If you could choose the referee, you can't. But if you're looking at just in terms of the system, I would still say the courts are better equipped and more likely to vindicate or care about individual rights. And the flip side, too, is the January 6th. I mean, if you're an adult and you watch that, you say that's a bad thing, But 9/11, right? We live in a childish world where every adult's going to be like, yeah, this is bad. You need to suss out who is doing what. But we're supposed to basically pretend, which I say we live in like the age of pretend, which is, that was a 9/11, holy cow event. So it's this fake emotion. And the Supreme Court, they're sensitive to that, the idea that it's 9/11. But in a way, it's worse than 9/11 because the 9/11 terrorists all got pro bono legal representation by the most elite lawyers in the country. Yeah. None of those elite lawyers are going to do anything for these Trump supporters, these MAGA moms.
Outside of that, people who have been detained in Guantanamo Bay will get these very high, prestigious pro bono
ACLU
lawyers
donating their time.
But you get Bernice from Oklahoma, who's being charged with 2 misdemeanors for trespass, and a lot of them are, and the lawyer's like, I'm not going anywhere near that.
And what's worse about that is they're being held. This is the thing where if you're a lawyer, you're like screaming on the inside because. And federal court's a little different than state. There's something called the federal sentencing guidelines, and it's very mathematical. Is it your first offense? Was it a nonviolent offense? What did you actually do when you get your time? Most of the indictments I've read are Bernice, some MAGA grandma, read some weird thing on the internet, showed up, didn't know there was a riot because she's just following the crowd, walks in, oh, hi, everybody, and she's just smiling and thinks nothing happened. Well, that's trespass. That's a day in jail, maybe. But they're being held without bail, right? So they're actually going to do more time pre-trial, and it's supposed to be the opposite because you're presumed innocent.
This is the scary thing about what we're seeing, right? So there's some other stories we can maybe get into it a little bit, like the FBI seizing congressional phone records, saying that members of Congress are now suspects. You've got Naomi Wolf. She recently went to Tucker Carlson saying totalitarianism is here, and we'll jump into those and get into those in fuller detail in just a second. But what's scary is the Democrats will not stop. They won't. The Republicans are worthless. Republican leadership is an oxymoron. And they're basically just like, Democrats, do your thing. The Democrats are basically saying, we will use the most insane interpretation of anything that we saw. We will use every bit of power we have. And the Republicans would never do that. They're too weak. So the Democrats are going to start steamrolling people. People who there's some video where the cops opened the door to the Capitol and people just walked in confused and bewildered. Those people are now facing serious jail time. Then you have the year of riots where people literally burned down buildings. What did Merrick Garland say? Well, it's extremism because it happened at night, but it's terror because it was during the day or something like that. I understand going after like the electoral college vote count is very, very serious. But don't you think burning down buildings and destroying cities and what the 19 plus dead directly from the riots, as well as the Chaz, where they pumped for 10 minutes, hundreds of rounds into an SUV with 2 teenagers in it, these people, shouldn't many of them be facing jail time as well?
Well, but that's a quaint view of American equality, right? Will Chamberlain talks about how the the media, these people in D.C., they're like the patrician class, and we're kind of like the peasant class. I call it the new Jim Crow, which is a little absurd given, what had happened there. But, it all starts a little bit early. The idea is like, I know that I'm a second-class citizen. I just know it. I accept it. That's why I'm not on the internet. Well, why can't I tweet out because I can't, because I'm not fully human to them.
Right.
Like, I fully understand it. I might not like it, but I get it. So when you understand that if you're perceived as conservative or right-wing, you are not a human being to these people, then they don't care if your buildings burn down. They care that their Capitol building, which is, by the way, taxpayer funded. As an American, I'm way more outraged that some mom can't feed her kids because her business was built down than I care that some like taxpayer funded building is going to have to be repaired. That's all taxpayer money anyway. But that's a very outdated and archaic model of all of us being equal as Americans.
No, I agree. And I say it all the time. Like, what's the point of me doing a video where I'm like, look at this double standard? Duh, we all know it. These now, I mean, granted, we're seeing this really hilarious thing where the New York Times and Slate, personalities are getting fired. They're losing net protection as well. So I will say there is some optimism in that regard that they're eating themselves faster and faster to the point where there might just not be whatever it is they're doing. The establishment media, the soft power will be going away.
Well, if all you do is hypocrisy, then yeah, you're like, that's a conservative cliche. There's that meme, here lies conservatism, and then the headstone says something like, imagine if it were a Democrat. But there's this other Lindsay something or another. I read all these people on Twitter, I don't even know their names, but he said the idea is you're just you're putting sand in the gears. So the idea is, I know for a fact that it annoys Chris Cuomo and Jake Tapper and these people. They do get annoyed. Now, are they going to change their minds? Are they going to be better? Not really, but it annoys them. And sometimes all you can do as a second-class citizen, as somebody who's essentially without institutional power, you can just annoy these people a little bit. And then you have, an instance like Chris Cuomo where he melts down on a guy, threatens to throw a guy down the stairs, and, is completely losing it. So you know that he's bothered by it. That's sometimes all you can do, and I think that's worth doing. But for someone like you or other people like Ben Shapiro or you, Luke, or just anybody with a big platform, when that's all I see in your time, I'm like, oh my God, go do something. Especially when people have money. That's when I get really triggered. It's like when it's Trump campaign people. It's like, okay, you guys raised $250 million post-election to investigate whatever you're going to investigate. Why don't you take, you know what it costs. Take $25 million and you could hire a full army of investigative reporters. Like, why doesn't CNN cover this? I don't know. Why don't you hire 50 reporters, though?
They don't really care.
But no, they don't
really
exactly
care.
That's the scam, and that's where I get into it with MAGA people, because you know what it costs. I know what it costs. Everybody here knows what it costs. So we're like, look, they got $250 million, dude. You're going to give them more money? You are an idiot. That's what I tell them, and people don't like to hear that, but I don't really care.
They could take $1 million and hire 8, 9, 10 reporters. You don't got to give them 6 figures. Hire 20 and give them all 40-something thousand a year, and people will do it. Right now, people have lost their jobs. You can find people to do this. But you're right. They had $250 million. I don't think they actually really cared. More importantly, I think Trump cared, but the people around him certainly did not and weren't there to help him. They were there to extract as much as they could from him. And, well, he fell for it.
He fell for it, but moreover, the problem that I had is like the donors fell for it. I'm always like, demand more of your leaders. I think that's where, again, I differ from a lot of Trump people. Is the idea is like, if you go to bed tonight and you wake up, you're not going to be like, oh God, I just had Mike on my show and he's tweeting N-bombs. What? Indigestion. You're never going to wake up with indigestion. That's how you should be if you're Trump. You should just realize, okay, I don't want my people to wake up with indigestion. I know people like to have a lot of fun. I know that we should keep it light. I know they like a little bit of trolling. But I don't want people just to wake up with a complete case of what did I really do? And Trump would kind of do that over and over again, and that's where he became his own worst enemy. Or even stuff like, early on, I never liked was the beefing with LeBron James. Like, you're president now, dude.
Yeah.
You don't get to. You can beef with LeBron James in 2015. In 2018, guess what? You don't get to do that anymore.
Or slam dunking on Rosie while his supporters are being kicked off the internet. There's this famous saying that there's a meme about that says people who believe in politicians think that strippers actually like them. They don't. Politicians don't like you either, and a lot of them, sadly, are being used for their personal benefit, and a lot of it is not being done for your benefit.
Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to see the full show, come back to this channel, youtube.com/TimcastIRL, Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., where you can leave comments and super chat, and we actually will read your comments on the show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe. And if you want exclusive members-only content, segments you can't get anywhere else, go to timcast.com, become a member, and we even have full bonus episodes. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.